Hey everybody, it's part 3 of Seedah with Storytime with Sabrina. Chapter 3, The Showdown. People continued to be healed by Yesu's power in Seedah's village, and bad spirits continued to be driven away by the authority that Yesu had given to those who welcomed him and Pun into their lives. More people had welcomed Pun to be their constant companion until their number was about 20. They continued to meet together at the rock to speak with Pun as a group and talk about Yesu and all that he was doing in their lives. Some started to write songs celebrating Yesu and his father and Pun, which they would then teach to each other and the others. They sang these songs when they were together, and even sometimes when they were alone working in the garden or under the house. One day, as they were all coming back from their meeting at the rock, an angry mob greeted them as they entered the village. Looking around, Seedah saw the witch doctor with some of her friends and relatives, some Buddhas, monks, with some of the older people of the village with them. Carrying hoes, jungle machetes, and other garden tools, and shouting about how the Yesu lovers were killing the traditions of their ancestors, the mob surrounded Seedah and her friends. Quickly, Yesu's group formed a circle linking arms and facing the mob around them. After a quick plea for Yesu's help, they started to sing a song celebrating Yesu's father as their defender. Yesu's father, most powerful of all, he is the powerful warrior. Thousands of warriors at his feet fall, he is the powerful warrior. Yesu's father is our defense, he is the powerful warrior. His love for us is our confidence, he is the powerful warrior. More than able to save us, he is the powerful warrior. If we die, he will take us to be with our powerful warrior. As they sang, Seedah saw among the angry crowd the tall, lean, gray one she had seen with the witch doctor, the two blue-gray dragons, the two bat-like creatures with the red glowing eyes, and the weird creature that she had seen at the Buddhist temple. But as they continued to sing, she also saw Yesu's tall, glowing warriors stepping out of the surrounding rainforest in small groups until there was such a large number of them that she had no idea how many there were. The tall gray one was muttering as he looked around, and as if in response, a very large red dragon crashed out of the palm trees into the clearing that they all stood in. As Seedah and her friends continued to sing more and more loudly, Seedah closed her eyes and pictured them singing in front of Yesu's father, on his royal throne, surrounded by myriads of Yesu's warriors. Her heart filled with joy as she thought of his love for her, of his warm welcome to her, and of one day, whether today or a day far in the future after she had grown old, going to Yesu's place to be with him forever. Opening her eyes again, she saw Yesu's warriors in full-on combat with all the dragons and weird creatures, their flaming swords moving so rapidly that it looked like the air was on fire all around them. The giant red dragon's angry roar filled the air as he lunged at the group of warriors at his feet. Lifting their arms in unison as if wielding invisible shields, the group of warriors moved together into a solid mass. The dragon's open mouth revealed massive, sharp-looking teeth, and his long claws reflected the glowing light of the warriors as he bore down upon them. Suddenly, with a surprised yip, the huge dragon realized that a couple of teeth had broken and a few claws chipped off on the invisible force field that the warriors had created as they had clumped together, and also that he had bounced off of it and was flying through the air to land with a crash in the middle of his army. Looking back to see what the people of the angry mob were doing, she saw that although they still wanted to kill Seedah and her friends, they were looking up at some of the tall warriors who had formed a circle between Yesu's friends and their attackers. As the warriors drew their flaming swords, the attackers started to back away with looks of terror starting to take over their faces. After the initial shock of having watched these warriors appear out of thin air wore off a little, the band of attackers dropped their weapons and fled in all different directions. Seedah and her friends burst into another song celebrating how Yesu had protected them. The great dragon's army was starting to break up and run in all different directions. Yesu's warriors followed them, all in groups this time, closely pursuing them as they fled into the jungle. Things were rather peaceful in the village after that. The Buddhas and the witch doctor still scowled at them when they went by, but they were afraid to try to harm them any more. Several more villagers joined the little band of Yesu's friends, including some of the Buddhas who left the temple and never went back. Some months went by, and one day Wen came back from visiting her sister, who had married into another village about a half-day's walk from theirs. The first thing she did was to find Seedah because she had exciting news to tell her. People from far away came to Ordi's village, telling them about Yesu and his father, and they brought the book. Wen could scarcely contain her excitement. Seedah's heart gave a leap. Do you mean the book that contains Yesu's father's words? She asked breathlessly. Yes, Yesu's father's words, Wen exclaimed. They have a house there with wooden places to sit up off the floor, and a wooden box in the front, and on the wooden box the book lies open for anyone to read. I must go there at once, Seedah nearly shouted in her excitement. Seedah had never walked anywhere as fast as she walked to that village that day. At times she couldn't help herself and broke into a run, but she knew she needed to pace herself because it was a long walk and there were no villages in between. Puen, this is so amazing, she said to him as he laughingly tried to stay with her in her varying paces. When at last they arrived at Ordi's village, Seedah had no trouble picking out the house that Wen had told her about. It looked so different from the others. Unlike the bamboo houses with their thatched grass roofs that she was used to seeing, this was wooden, painted white, and had a metal roof. As she got close to it, she was met by a villager. Is this the house that has the book in it that contains Yesu's father's words? She asked. The villager smiled. Yes, this is the house, she replied. I'm Seedah. Seedah introduced herself. I come from Wen's village because she told me about the book. I have a great desire to read it. My name is Ulevan, the villager replied. My husband reads the book to others and talks about what it says every Sunday here. Then your husband is a friend of Yesu's? Seedah asked politely. Yes, a friend, and so am I, Ulevan replied. You are? Seedah asked, surprised and wondering why Puen did not walk beside Ulevan if she was Yesu's friend. Yes, I am, Ulevan answered patiently. May I go in and read the book now? Seedah requested. You may if you like, Ulevan said, showing her to the door and opening it for her. Thank you so much, Seedah called to her new friend over her shoulder as she entered the coolness inside the strange house. The house had big glass windows that let in plenty of light. Seedah saw the box Wen had told her about right away. Quickly going to it, she bent over to read the book that lay open on it. After a few minutes of reading, she knelt by the box so she could read better. Puen, she exclaimed, it's a story about Yesu going around healing people himself and making the bad spirits go away and talking to the crowds of people. There are lots of words that Yesu said to them. Yes, Puen said, smiling at her excitement. After she read one whole part of the book, she turned to another part and began reading. Look, it's talking about how Yesu's father sent you to the people who knew him when he lived on the earth. She read on a bit and then stopped. Why do you not walk with Ulevan as you do with all of Yesu's friends in my village? The people who came here from far away to tell Ulevan and her people about Yesu do not like me, Puen replied. They think of me as being out of control, and this is not good in their eyes. The group of people who sends them to your country forbids them to introduce me to the people and teaches them to explain that I was only for those of Yesu's friends who knew him when he lived on the earth. In this way they make Yesu's friends orphans while he is gone. It is a hard road trying to be a friend of Yesu's without me there to help, guide, and comfort. Looking into Puen's eyes and seeing the hurt in them, not just his own hurt at being rejected, but also hurt for the people who must do without him because of teachers who rejected Yesu's words, Seedah felt the tears springing to her eyes. How perfectly awful, she said. How is it that they like Yesu but not you? That makes no sense. You're practically the same person. They have never really met Yesu, Puen explained. They only read about him and formulate their own ideas about what he is like. Many traditions made by their elders and ancestors make parts of what they read empty and meaningless because they have been taught to reject it. What they don't realize is that when they reject parts of the Father's words, they render all of his words powerless in their lives. In truth, partial obedience equals disobedience. Partial acceptance equals rejection, because they have set themselves up as judges of the words instead of subjects of the king who spoke the words. Instead of trusting Yesu's Father to tell them what they need to know, they trust in themselves to decide which of Father's words are true and which do not matter anymore. Reaching out to take Puen's hand, Seedah said softly, I'm so glad you're in my life. With that, she went back to reading. After a few hours, the door opened softly and someone called, Seedah? Looking up, Seedah saw Ordi standing in the doorway. Ordi! Seedah exclaimed happily. Good health? Breaking into a smile, Ordi replied, Yes, good health. I brought you some food because I heard you had come, and I didn't know if you had eaten yet. Thank you, Seedah said. I haven't eaten. Ordi brought a package of rice and meat wrapped in banana leaves out of the cloth bag at her side. Seedah and Ority sat on one of the wooden seats and ate together. After exchanging news of their families, Seedah told her old friend of all that had happened in her village lately. Looking thoughtful, Ority asked about Pun. "I would so like to know Yesu more than just out of a book that lives in another house," she said wistfully. "He's so real to you and helps you to be free from the bad spirits and sickness." "Yes, and see how here in the book Yesu promised that Pun would come and be with us until he came back for us, to guide us and teach us everything and tell us things from Yesu. And his friend Peter even said that this promise was not just for the people who lived then, but for everyone who would ever welcome Yesu into their lives," Seedah explained, showing her old friend the places in the book where it talked about Yesu's good spirit. "How can I have Pun come and live with me?" asked Ority. "He's right here listening, and he would love to come to be with you always," Seedah replied, pointing to Pun, who sat beside her. Ority looked for a moment, then broke into a smile. "I see him," she said simply. "So nice to meet you," Pun said, smiling back at her. Then he doubled, as he had before, and when Pun came around to sit by Ority, Ority looked too delighted for words. After Ority left, it started to get dark. Seedah laid down on the floor between the wooden seats and fell asleep. The next morning she awoke and started reading again. Taking the book to a seat with her, she read, sitting down, while Pun sat beside her with his arm around her, occasionally explaining something from the book to her. After a few hours, Ulevan and her husband came in with some rice and meat for their breakfast. Exchanging a little small talk, they ate. As soon as they were done, there was a ruckus outside the house. Looking out through the window, Seedah saw a group of angry-looking soldiers from the city coming up the dirt road of the village towards the house they were in. They wore uniforms and carried guns. Walking amongst them, Seedah saw a different kind of bad spirit than any she had ever seen before. Dressed all in black, these bad spirits looked like people, but with white faces, which severely contrasted their jet-black hair and red glowing eyes, and fangs, off of which a little blood dripped down their chins. Turning away from the window, Seedah saw one of Yesu's warriors standing behind her with his arms crossed, looking coldly at the soldiers as they burst into the house. But the soldiers did not see him. Seeing the book, they threw it back on the box and yelled at the three in the room that if they did not spit on the book, they would die, but if they spit on it, they could go free. There was a moment of silence. Ulevan's husband went over and spit on the book. The soldiers told him to leave. Ulevan had a tear in her eye, but she followed her husband's lead, spitting on the book and walking out the door. Knowing that it was because they did not have Pun that they lacked the strength to hold to Yesu, Seedah felt sorry for them. Walking over to the book, with tears in her eyes, she tenderly wiped the spit off of it, murmuring, "Father, forgive them." Immediately a shot rang out, and Seedah crumpled to the ground. Yesu's warrior walked over to her, bent over her, and offered her his hand. As she turned and reached out her hand, the warrior helped her out of her body. They stood and looked for a brief moment at her lifeless body as it lay on the floor, bleeding from the head, but with a peaceful expression on the face. Ignorantly thinking they had won something, the angry soldiers stormed out of the house, slamming the door as they went. As Seedah and the warrior turned to walk away, suddenly she spotted Yesu standing in the back of the room. "Yesu!" she fairly screamed with delight. Yesu's face beamed with an ear-to-ear smile as she ran into his open arms. "You did such a good job," he said, almost crying with joy. "I'm so proud of you." As she stood, savoring his embrace, he repeatedly kissed the top of her head. "Come," he said suddenly, "we must show my father that you made it safely home." They walked out the door of the house where the book lived. The soldiers were nowhere to be seen. As they passed Ority's house, they stopped to peek in the doorway. Holding a sobbing Ulevan, Ority gently quieted her like a mother does a distraught child, and began to tell her about Pun. "So that will be all right," Seedah said to Yesu, "just like you comforted your friend Peter, and then sent your good spirit to him, so that later he had the strength to die for you. I'm so merciful and send us help for our weaknesses." Leaving the village behind, Seedah began to notice that she felt light and that there was no pain or discomfort of any kind in her being. Yesu stepped behind her, and wrapping her in his arms, they rose above the treetops and flew away. The bird's-eye view of all she had ever known fascinated her as they flew. After the aerial tour of her homeland was done, they rose through the clouds to finally see the place Yesu had been making for her. To be continued.